a city in the northeast Julian Dalmatian part of Italy, whose people have always been a mixture of languages and different souls and cultures. For nearly 2,000 years, this area has been ruled either by Romans, Venetians, Austro-Hungarians, Italians, or Croatians or Yugoslavians. Borders changed, languages changed and shifted. Many families lived in the same house over generations, never moving from that house. Yet, over the years, they became Italians, Austro-Hungarians, Croatians, and they never moved. It's the borders that shifted around them, but they never moved. At the end of World War II, Italy lost all these areas to the Yugoslavian communist regime. As a result, entire populations found themselves forced from their ancestral homes and lands, and they became displaced persons, DPs, persons without a citizenship. And I am one of those. It's very easy to say, well, you don't look like one of those. Well, how did they look? What did they look like? I have become so internationally fitted and formed that one can say, well, you're not from there. Yes, I am from there. And I've adapted like a chameleon. I've had to adapt to wherever I was living. Clearly, my migration story does not issue from economic matters, no reasons, but rather from political ones firmly grounded in my experience of exile and refugee. That explains the word castaways in the title of the book. My shipwreck tempered my character and that of many others, which together with my sense of humor, in our language we call it morbin, has imprinted my identity in ways not easily understood. Essentially, I am a vessel of memory in a world that is forgetting. So, let me read to you the first piece, which will, I think, delineate much better who I am, where I come from, and what happened to me. The other day, I don't know why, maybe I wanted to have a little fun with history, I started trying to put together the phases of destiny that brought me here. I began to follow the vicissitudes of what was more or less the life that many of us immigrants, exiles, and post-war stragglers have experienced personally or through the memories of our parents. And in the end, it seemed to me that I had closed a circle, that I was back where I started from. Let me explain. I come from Fiume, as I said before, which a century ago was still under the rule of that jolly old man, Cecco Pepe. Of course, formerly he was known as the Emperor Franz Joseph I. And at that time, they said that Austria was really un paese ordinato, a well-ordered country, which gave space to many different ethnic groups and languages mixed together. It was a civilized country, which was well run and gave few orders, and it protected our ancient Italian language and culture in a true and modern example of multiculturalism. And in Italian schools, we learned the 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U, with the Latin phrase, Austria est imperare orbi universo. In other words, Austria's destiny is to rule the whole world. In short, we were free to feel Italian in a multicultural empire, the real Mitteleuropa, where, as my father liked to remember, and of course, memories tend to shift, we tend to blow them up into more than they really were. But he used to say that we ate 5 times a day, and there was respect serenity, and work for all those who wanted it. Serenity and respect, where everyone got by at least in 5 languages. Venetian, and Venetian is a language, Italian, Croatian, German, and Hungarian. And only our beautiful sea spoke the same language to everyone, as it still does now to those willing to listen. After the Great War, World War I, however, it happened that Czechoslovakia's Austro-Hungarian Empire fell apart, and we were redeemed by Italy, although it was never clearly understood whether this was by conquest or liberation. Only one thing is certain: we found ourselves part of the much longed for motherland, which in the meantime had become black and fascist. And so it was that from being seen as Italian under the Austro-Hungary, we came to be considered, more than anything else, Julian Dalmatian in Italy. Those who had been our Slovenian and Croatian neighbors and friends for generations no longer enjoyed the tolerance or the respect that we Italian had enjoyed under Czechoslovakia. In short, we found ourselves in a motherland that we had dreamed of, but which had little order and ordered everyone about. A motherland where to be Italian, you had to have a shirt of a certain color, and where to be able to work, you did not need to want to work, but had to be a card-carrying member of the fascio. Those who have studied the history of our country cannot but agree with the journalist Sergio Romano when he observes that, in essence, the history of Italy since the Risorgimento has always been based on the right policies at the wrong time and the wrong policies at the right time. Perhaps this is why, before the Second World War broke out, fascist Italy, fearful of making enemies with the Germans, allied itself with them, with the fine result that we made enemies with everyone else. We wanted to be smart by joining those who appeared to be strongest, and in the end, along with the war, we lost everything else. Those land of ours, redeemed with the blood of so many Sicilians, Calabrians, Tuscans, Sardinians, and so many other poor devils, became no longer redeemed, but simply lost forever, confirming the proverb that says, whoever wants to be rich in 1 year is hanged in 6 months. In the space of a few years, we went from being Fiumani, Polesani, Zaratini, Spallatini, etc., to being in an Italy that filled us with rhetoric and propaganda that had almost convinced us that we were the chosen people, that had covered our shortages with songs and black shirts, that had made us strong by dint of faith and gusto. World War I muskets and orders shouted manfully, but without sense of order. After which we ended up finding ourselves homeless, with nothing to eat, going from black to red, from fascism to communism, to being considered dirty Italian fascists, both by the Yugoslav Titini and the Italian communists, with a lot of new orders, fear, and propaganda. Most of us, 350,000 of us, chose to remain Italian, and so we packed up and left the fears, the spies, the rubble, and the barred orders behind, in order to go and take refuge in what remained of a defeated and humiliated Italy. And there they called us Slavs and Croats, and accused us of having come to take away their jobs, their food, their homes. An Italy where many of our people would spend years in refugee camps. Because of how we were treated, how we were made to feel as if we were asking for charity in our own home, while the state dragged its feet when it came to recognizing our citizenship and our rights, many of us took the few possessions we still had and left once again, this time in search of lands where we could live with dignity. And now, here I am. I had the good fortune to set foot in a country like Canada, an orderly, peaceful, multicultural country where 2 languages are spoken, and where even if you are no longer in your own country, you can feel free to be Italian among Canadians, and where only sometimes certain Italians who don't know their own history think we are Slavs and Croats. This is why I say that the circle is closed, because what I have now in Canada looks a bit like the good old days of Czechoslovakia. So, this is one piece which reveals to you who I am really. I would like to go back to our first arrival in this continent. And by continent, I mean Canada and the United States in this case. We arrived after 15 days of crossing the Atlantic in January of '52. We landed in New Orleans, and then we were slated to go to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Anyhow, we got off the ship, and the first thing that, after all the work with the various bureaucratic problems, the first thing that came to mind is, let's find a washroom desperately. So, I'm going to read to you about modern Vespasians. Now, Vespasians, let me tell you, does anyone know what a Vespasian is? I Vespasiani? I famosi Vespasiani are public washrooms that were created by Emperor Vespasian, because Rome and other cities were becoming a bit unseemly to see all the people doing their needs. Why? Because it was getting to be very dirty. It was getting to be the kind of city that no one wanted to walk in. It was dirty. People peed and did everything else in the street. So he created Vespasians for hygienic reasons too, but also because every time someone used the Vespasian, they had to pay something. So the state treasury was getting a little bit richer. Okay. So I will not read to you anything from there. That's, go back. There we go. So, as I remember that it was, as if it were today, the test of linguistic ability, or more simply the ability to read signs, the so-called semiotics, that my father and I demonstrated as soon as we disembarked from the Liberty ship in New Orleans. By the way, Liberty ships were troop transport ships that had been built during the war by the Americans to transport the troops across the ocean to Europe, the European war. It was basically a shell. We were, let me see, 10 to a cabin in hammocks, and you ate standing up in low, narrow tables, and the food was strictly American, which turned us a little bit off. Anyhow, we immediately ran in search of a bathroom. Within seconds, my eagle-eyed father, with a smug look, pointed to a door with a tag hanging from a nail that read, "Closet." And an old black woman in a white coat sitting next to it. My father winked at me, noting that America was not so different from Italy after all. It's just a good thing, he said, that we're a bit of a polyglot and no other words for toilet. International words like closet, even if they seem to have misspelled it a bit on the card. Now convinced, with me at his heels, my father approached the all-black woman. She must have been the toilet attendant, the one who, like in Italy, collected tips and gave out toilet paper. Without further ado, my father politely handed her some money. The old woman looked at him, muttering something unintelligible. More confident than ever, my father went and tried the handle. It was locked. Looking questionably at the old woman, my father muttered, "Closet?" The black woman, without giving him a glance, seemed to confirm this by grunting, "Closet." Fascinated, I watched the struggle between the indifferent will of the one and the desperate need of the other. Now red in the face, frustrated, and at the limit of his patience and endurance, my father began to raise his voice, repeating, "Closet," obtusely echoed by her, "Closed." It sounded like a struggle between two deaf people. Eventually, my father gave up, and we left in despair, trying to figure out why the closets in America were closed. Or was it just for us? Following this linguistic humiliation, my father and I went in search of a toilet. We decided that maybe the best thing would be to follow other men, because obviously the knowledge we brought from Italy wasn't sufficient. From what we could understand, Americans clearly did not learn from the same book. We had, or maybe they had, skipped a few pages. In any event, we decided to watch what other men were doing and do as they did. Let's remember also that while we were deciding what to do, our original need for a bathroom was becoming ever more desperate. In short, it required an immediate solution. 2 minutes later, we decided to follow other men who seemed to enter and exit safely through a door that said men. No sooner said than done. We went through the door and found ourselves in a nice, large, tiled room with many men in the center, all of them standing around a low, round basin, some 2 meters in diameter. In the center of the basin, there was a fountain. I immediately thought that Americans seemed to be very sociable. So much so that they prefer to do everything together, even that thing. Chatting all the time, very much as ancient Romans did in their Vespasians. We had been introduced to this type of conviviality during our voyage on the Liberty ship, where we all ate together, standing around tall, narrow tables with not a chair in sight. So my father and I, happy as clams, drew up to the basin, slipping between other men, and lucky for us that in those days, long ago, the zippers had not yet replaced buttons. So that slower process gave us time for one last peek at our basin fellows, and God, we stopped cold. You wouldn't believe what they were doing. They were calmly washing their hands under the fountain. And to think that, like two complete fools, we were about to... I guess I don't need to tell you that we quickly grasped the obvious. We had started the operation from the tail end. Red in the face, taking faster and shorter steps, we finally reached our yearned-for heaven. A few moments later, we were back at the now famous basin, a lot calmer and sure of ourselves. We washed our hands as if we were one of the Americans. We wouldn't be fooled again. When we finished washing our hands, we looked around to see where they kept the towels. Nothing. You would think that they might at least have some paper. Not on your life. What could we make of these Americans who ate standing up like horses and then didn't have anything to dry their hands with? What could we conclude? Either they were ignorant or we were. We had barely reached the conclusion that it must have been them when we noticed those huge men, well, compared to us at least, going from the wash basin to the wall and standing directly against it. A strange, loud noise, like a vacuum cleaner, was coming from a certain gadget attached to the wall that instead of sucking air, was blowing out hot air. Not wanting to get trapped once more by our ignorance, we stood there watching carefully what those men were doing before deciding what to do. As usual, it didn't take us long to catch on. A simple push of a button did everything. So with a certain smugness, we approached those machines as if we were regular patrons and looked at the new arrivals with a certain condescension. We each chose a machine, pushed the button, and rubbed our hands under the nice warm hair. Happy as clams, our hands well dried, we pressed the button to turn the machine off. But, wouldn't you believe it, that crazy thing started to blow hot air again. We pressed the button again, nothing doing. The darn thing was going full blast ahead. We looked around, scared that maybe we had broken the machine, maybe they would arrest us and we would miss our train for Milwaukee. Nothing doing. It was time to cut and run before anyone realized that we had damaged 2 of their machines. And that was our first experience in America. Okay? Now, it so happens that now at this point we are in Toronto, where I was the director of a magazine, an Italian magazine, dedicated to Italians from that part of our world, the Giuliano Dalmati or Julian Dalmatians. And so, in directing this magazine, I decided that I would introduce a few new things, because so far we had only older people my age. I was young then, that were buying the newspaper or the magazine and writing to us. And I said, no, this is not good. We need not just to have men, we need women. We need the voice of women, and we need the voice also of young people, young sons, the daughters. So I in charge with a friend of mine to direct this new column of La Voce della Donna. And then I left for Italy. I had retired from university together with my wife. We went to Italy, to Sicily, and spent there 6 years. The first week I was there, I get an email from this friend that I had left in charge of the column. And she says, Diego, it's not going to work. Nobody's writing. The women are not writing to me. What am I going to do? Another week, and then I'll close the column, that's it. I said, no, don't do anything like that. I'll take care of it, don't worry. I hang up or say goodbye. And I said to myself, yeah, sure, I'll take care of it. How? I said, nothing, I'll become a woman. And so I became a woman. I sat down and I wrote a letter as a woman. It's not that difficult. Not really. Not if you have spent all your life not looking at men and trying to understand them, but observing women as I did. All my life I have observed women. And they are something else. They're marvelous, marvelous beings. Men should be envious, as I am. So, what should I do? So I wrote. I wrote. I hope you won't be offended if I call you by your first name. Since you started this column, I've been waiting for its arrival at my house with every issue. So I feel that you are part of the family. I feel sorry for you when I see that you call us at the table and we don't show up. We don't write as you invite us to do. But you must understand, my dear friend, that after leaving school, like many others, I have not opened a book except for the missal. And as for writing, it's always the usual letters that do nothing but repeat the usual news to family members who certainly do not write more or better than I do. And so now I lack the practice, the confidence, with the written word. And perhaps I can't even believe that what I am about to tell would be of interest to anyone. Frankly, I don't know if I feel like going back to the old days. I don't know. I don't want to always feel like a victim of injustice, to think about what my life would have been like if, I don't know. I don't know if I feel like being a wake-up call to a world that is no longer there and that perhaps never existed as we want to remember it. There's nothing wrong with memories of the past that have formed us, but we must also live in the present. As a woman, I've always thought that men are more philosophers, politicians, dreamers, idealists, romantic than women. Maybe it's because men have more time on their hands, while for women, the work is never done. A man can afford flights of fancy, hope and despair, while a woman must make sure that the business of the home, family, school, health, etc. continue to operate at maximum efficiency with minimum cost and labor. Nonetheless, it seems to me that someone was quite right when he said that the woman is also a mirror, because she represents the darkest part of herself, because she is also what men have made of her. I don't see my life in Venezia Giulia before and after the war and our exodus, first to Italy and then here, as detached pieces of my story, but as my continuous becoming who I am to arrive at the reality I live today. My life has been nothing but a continuous building of nests, creating life, nourishing, protecting, no matter where, here or there, in our land of origin, or in those that have welcomed us. My function has always been dictated not by the fact of being in this or that land, but my being a woman daughter, a woman sister, a woman friend, a woman wife, a woman mother, a woman woman. I have never been news, but I've always been there, ready to lend a hand, a push, a physical or moral support, ready to do the dirty work so that someone else could glory in some public act. By dint of doing this, I felt more and more confirmed in my inadequacy and inability to express myself in public. It was like when you were ashamed to ask a question in class because you thought it was stupid, and 2 minutes later, the teacher complimented a classmate for asking the very same question. Yet, going back to the times I have lived through, I at least see many scenes of disaster and devastation after bombings or in the refugee camps, and it was always the same scene. Men outside in a clearing, smoking and cursing the enemy, whether it be God or the state or whoever, and explaining how they would have avoided the tragedy that we were experiencing. In the meantime, we women were worried about the fate of the children, what to eat, where to shelter and sleep, how best to resolve the situation, not in absolute and universal terms. We were often the ones to call the men to their most immediate duty, gathering tools from the rubble, wood to make a fire, blankets, finding a roof, organizing ourselves into a small social group. All of this is not to devalue the constant hard work carried out by our men. I would just like to see that without so much fanfare, the not indifferent daily contributions of women be also recognized. So let's not be happy to accept gratefully the publicity-driven soap of Mother's Day or Women's Day or Valentine's Day. There. You don't recognize yourself in that, do you?
Yes.
You don't, do you? No, because you're modern. Because you don't need men anymore. But we're talking about different times.
Not so different.
Not too much.
Not so different.
Yes, you're quite right. I was hoping that someone would say that. I keep hearing something scratching. I don't know if it's me or something else. When I talk about these experiences, I'm talking about experiences generally in the United States. The United States is not Canada. Canada is a marvelous country. Let's be happy that we're here, honestly. When we first arrived in the United States, we were faced with completely different society, different from what we had left in Italy. Oh yes, Italy was in ruins, true. But it was our land, our country, our people, our language, our culture. And we arrived in the United States not knowing a word of English. It's not like today when young people come from Italy and apart from their cell phone that reach all over the world, they also have knowledge of English. We in those days had studied French in school, so French was the language we could speak. And in the United States, French or Italian or Spanish was not understood. It was English. And many times it was English, English, English. And you couldn't even use your, how could I say, gestures. I remember one time when I went to buy an airmail stamp. I went up to this little caged place and I said, I had the letter, the envelope in my hand, and it was, in those days, the envelopes for airmail were clearly indicated as airmail with little stripes and so on. So you couldn't make a mistake. I went, there was a little old man inside the cage, and I said, on the right, the spot where you put airmail. Huh? What do you want? He said, par avion, airmail. How do you want? Speak English. Eventually, I saw there were airmail stamps inside. So I reached with my hand through this little opening. I reached, then, puff, I got a slap in my hand. I walked away without the stamp. So that was that. It was very difficult, okay? You can say, okay, very good, bye-bye, and that was it. So you may laugh now because you said, come on, everyone speaks English nowadays. Nowadays, not then. 1952, the United States. So we arrive in the United States, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Not exactly, let's say, the New York. And I remember as if it were today, the day Mama told us that she couldn't understand the new world we had ended up in. She said that if she could only get her head around it, she would understand the real character of these people in that vast land that was the United States. I remember that on that occasion, Papa remarked that if we gave her a fulcrum, Mama would lift the truth out for us. But she should be careful because sometimes it's like lifting a stone and discovering poisonous snakes underneath. To make a long story short, I think that what Mama was looking for is what young people nowadays call a handle on things. Is that what you still say? I don't know, because language is changing so fast that maybe having a handle on things is no longer used. Still used? I'm glad. So, she said that the fact that a year later she announced that she had found the famous fulcrum in the novels of Zan Grey. Has anyone heard of Zan Grey? My son-in-law's heard of Zan Grey. And he wrote novels of the Far West, cowboys, and she would start reading them, all of them, as soon as she learned enough English. was useless to try to make her understand that the days of the far west and the cowboys were dead and buried. Who went around on horseback ready to shoot the first guy he didn't like? Come on. Or because he had done him a bad turn. Who went around with pistols and rifles? Who these days would be barricaded in the house with big or small rifles, machine guns and stuff like that? Oh, come on. Where would you find those who threw sticks of dynamite into the saloon just because the bartender refused to give him a drink, seeing that he was already drunk out of his head? Where did you ever hear of some poor devil who set fire to his boss's house because he had fired him for stealing at work, or because he had caught him buzzing around his daughter? In short, we tried to make Mama understand. In our family, by the way, we called her La Gnocca, the kraut, La Gnocca, because she had studied at Graz in Austria, and so she spoke and thought like Germans. To make her understand, as I was saying, that now we lived in a civilized world with generous, kind, respectful people, with high morals, who wouldn't hurt a fly. It was enough to see how they treated domestic animals, and also those not so domestic. What wouldn't they do to save a whale or the egg of a rare bird? It was enough to see how respectful they were of the police force. So respectful, in fact, that I could have sworn that even if the police had gone on strike, no one would have dreamed of beating up a poor old lady to steal her pension, or let alone drive more than 60 miles an hour on the highway. Well, you may have already guessed that our stubborn mama turned a deaf ear and started to read all 20 of Zen Gray's novels in English. A year later, she had finished and digested all that rubbish, all those scenes of duel in the sun, of pistoleros shooting and hanging people without caring whether the poor devil was innocent or not. Exciting scenes of all the males in the village with an itchy trigger finger that couldn't wait to set up a posse to catch and shoot to death a wretch, often an innocent one, who had fled only because those madmen wouldn't listen to reason and scared him to death. The common theme of all those far west movies was that men wanted to be free to do their own thing, when and where and how they wanted. Whenever they felt the presence of civil society with its laws and sheriff coming too close, they ran for the hills, going even further out into the far west, where they were sure not to find another living soul, where they didn't have to account to anyone for their action, where they could fire the biggest guns they wanted, where they were alone unto themselves, where at night they might sit around a fire in the middle of the prairie and twang beautiful country western songs to their horses, chewing the usual tasty dish of baked beans. Needless to say, we all laughed when she tried to convince us that it was not possible, that the Americans who descended from those cowboys had not been influenced even a little by those traditions and their way of doing things and thinking. In order to convince us, she wanted us to believe that we, Italians, were the fine result of a history of eternal promises and compromises, of parochialism, of a dangerous flexibility that tends to erase the line between good and evil, between true and false, between lawful and unlawful, and yes, even of individualism, but of individualism of love, which, according to Mama, was quite different from the American individualism that is based on the cult of power. And so it was that my poor Mama remained convinced until the very end that she was right. I don't know what to think these days. I see and read many things, and sometimes I think that maybe I'm finally beginning to understand what she had understood so many years ago, when we had just set foot in that blessed land. it occurs to me that if we go on at this rate, perhaps the whole world will become nothing but a far west. And I will read to you one final piece, and then I'll stop. This time, it's not about reality. It's about imagination. We talk about reality. I just finished reading something that presumably is reality, the reality we live in this world now. But what about what happens above us? Do we know what happens above us, up there? Do we know? We don't. Nobody tells us. So we have to imagine. And perhaps through imagination, we might just, as Picasso says, well, the prime directive. I was watching an episode of Star Trek with Captain Jean-Luc Picard. And do you remember that in one episode in particular, as they were traveling to the galaxy and bumping into civilization, new planets and various civilizations, some more advanced than ours, but some also less advanced than ours. They were tempted to help these that were backward, say, look, we'll teach you, we know, we've been where you are, we have gone further ahead. But then very wisely, they decided on the prime directive of non-interference. You don't go and interfere with another civilization and ruin the pattern that would have led them perhaps somewhere else. So, thinking of that, I wrote the following. It's hopeless. It's been 3 nights already that he hasn't been able to sleep a wink. And no matter how many times he looks over the news that keep coming from down there, he still can't make heads or tail of it. And that, needless to say, is rather embarrassing for him. He's so edgy that he finally decides to get up and take a walk in the garden. How ironic, he thinks bitterly. It's from that other garden down there where I keep getting these upsetting news. There where since the dawn of time I rested after 6 days of non-stop creation. Indeed beautiful your garden, hisses the eternal snake in his ear. Too bad you have taken such poor care of it, letting it go to weed. All yours, and now you don't know which way to turn, huh? Oh, leave me alone for once. Our Lord snaps at him angrily. You know quite well that the prime directive of non-interference I myself created forbids it. A little late, this non-interference, don't you think? The other mocks him. But I understand, given how it worked out for you with those 2 first ones and their offsprings. The Lord covers his ears, and the other, seeing that for the moment his objective has failed, slithers away snickering. Alone again, he considers convening an extraordinary council of his other 2/3, but ends up discarding the idea since he has already consulted himself to the point of exhaustion. No, he thinks, here we have to go to the bottom, do research on the spot, using trusted collaborators who have sufficient experience among the so-called weeds in that garden of mine. Even before he completes his thought, Gabriel and Raphael, enveloped in their white wings, instantly appear and prostrate at his feet. So boys, he says without preambles, I have summoned you to assign you a mission of the utmost discretion, and I want it done immediately. As you may already have guessed, I am extremely upset by hourly reports coming from down there, from what was once my garden. Now I want to get to the bottom of this, and I'm not talking about the facts already well known, but rather about what drives those people down there to behave in a way that is, let's face it, unscrupulously dissolute, if not criminal. The two are about to nosedive down there, but his booming voice stops them cold. Just make sure you bring me a concise expose, not a novel. Present me with an account in the form of, I don't know, a metaphor. Like the parables, Gabriel suggests, those your son used to tell when you made him go down there. Yes. Just like that, he hastens to confirm. Now get going, so you'll be back before nightfall. Tonight, I'd like to put a stone over this wretched matter and be able to sleep at last. A flash of light, a rustle, another flash of light, and the two archangels are back already before him. At ease, boys. He points to pillows so soft they look like clouds. So, tell me at once, what have you discovered about the shameful situation? Come, speak up. After getting the consent from his companion, Gabriel coughs and takes the floor. Not being good at making up parables, I borrowed one from an ancient writer named Aesop. I think one of his fables might illustrate rather well a certain mindset that seems to prevail down there, and which may at least be one of the causes of the unfortunate situation in which they find themselves in these last few decades. Enough of the premise, he interrupts him. Get on with the fable. Well, it so happens that one day the master, I premise that we are in ancient Greek times. The master, I was saying, wished to go to the public baths and asked his trusty servant to go and see if there were many men in line for the baths, because he did not want to have to stand in line under the sun for a long time. The servant went and found a long queue at the entrance to the baths and observed a strange thing. Each one who entered the bath stubbed his toe against a large stone left abandoned right at the doorway. Every person who stubbed his toe cursed in pain, cursed whoever left the stone there, and stepped over it. After this scene was repeated several times, he saw one person who, after stubbing his toe on the stone, like everyone else, reached down, picked up the stone, and threw it far from the doorway. Seeing this, the servant ran home and informed the master that there was only one man at the bath. Delighted at the good news, the master arrived at the bath, but instead of one man, he saw a very long queue. Clearly displeased by the servant's dishonesty, even before chastising him, he demanded an explanation. But the servant justified himself by reasoning that the master had asked him to go and see how many men were in line, and that in fact only one of those persons in the queue had been willing to move the stone and thus prevent those following him from harming themselves. The servant had rightly concluded that only that one person could be said to be worthy of being called a man. And what does this mean in our case? The Lord asked Gabriel with curiosity. I have unfortunately concluded that there are few, very few such men in your garden, my Lord. Thank you, Gabriel. You have been very concise and have chosen a fable that very plainly illustrates a disturbing mindset. And you, Raphael, what about you? I will be even briefer, Raphael replies in the warm, persuasive voice of a true fabulator. But I hope, nevertheless, to give a good idea of how society works in that garden of yours, so that it can help you understand one of the causes of its endemic problem. Imagine then a flock of sheep that place all their trust in their faithful sheepdog to lead them to the best pasture and to protect and defend them from the many threats that always beleaguer them. They spend their lives peacefully grazing during the day and sleeping trustingly and placidly at night, watched over swear by their sheepdog. They cannot even remotely imagine that every night, in the cover of darkness, their trusty sheepdog wanders off into the forest to mate with a ravenous she-wolf in exchange for a sheep. All there, I hope that makes the point, my Lord. Indeed it does, Raphael. Your parable revealed what many choose to ignore, if not outright deny. Bravo, boys, you may now retire. Discreetly the two archangels disappear in a flash. Then the Lord walks away dismayed, muttering in his beard, honestly, I can't understand how everything could have gone so far off the rail. Oh, but this time they'll have to fend for themselves. I won't sacrifice my son for them a second time. Besides, the prime directive would forbid me to do so. Who knows? He wonders wistfully. Maybe it would have been better if I had not bothered at all about that apple. Behind the scenes, a jeer can be heard. And I'll close with one of my latest poems. Sun threads still weave incessant nets for birds to perch on, and tell of distant promised lands to dream of, while I live stolen breaths of time, devouring time, as I dance on the knife edge of love. And with that, I close. Thank you for being patient. I'm sorry if I said things or wrote things that might have shocked or displeased some, but that is just a bit of fantasy. Okay? What if? If you have any questions, ask.
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
I was wondering which language you write and if you translate yourself.
Good question. The third book, the first two books were in Italian. The first books of poetry were in Italian. The third book I wrote in Italian, and then I translated it myself in English. The one who wrote the introduction said that I had written it in English and then translated it in Italian. I said, no, you should have known better. He said, no, it was the other way around. I don't know. Anyhow, I said no. So he had to write a little explanatory note saying, I made a mistake. So on. The following books were in English. The book poetry also that I wrote about the downtown East Side situation, I wrote in English first, and then I translated it in Italian, and that was very difficult because the kind of language that I used to describe and to talk about the reality of downtown East Side, druggists and so on, I didn't know all those words in Italian. Whereas here in English, I had sort of grown with them. So I had to go, let's say, in the dark side of internet and search for those words. The following book was in poetry was in English. Then the book that I wrote as an autobiography was in Italian. It was supposed to be published in Italy. It took too long, so a friend of mine who has a publishing house in Toronto said, do it here. So I had to translate the whole thing in English, and it was published, and that's the book that I should send to you. This book everything was written in Italian, and so I had to translate it in English. And sometimes I felt ill at ease because some of the things that I wrote about in Italian came more naturally in Italian. And perhaps when I translated it in English, I didn't have that same, how do you say, emotion that I had in Italian, so maybe it came out stilted, I don't know. And the next book is going to be in Esperanto. No, the next book will not be written, period. I will not write anything anymore. By the way, the book also contains a number of my pieces of artwork, so you can enjoy that. But it was a very good question. It was everything, basically everything that I think is in Italian. I can think equally also in English, but I prefer in Italian. Yes?
At what age you left home, and what affections did you leave behind, like people? Who were the people that you left behind? Friends, age mates, classmates, grandparents?
It's an interesting
cousins?
question. I think perhaps the book that I wrote that was published three years ago, and I presented here some 2 years ago, I believe, explains that. In Fiume, or now called Rijeka, I was only 8 years old when I left, so, and I had been sick the first 3 years, so I don't know anybody there, okay? My mother, my father knew, and they tried to convey this to me, but it meant nothing to me. I could not duplicate what it meant to them, okay? For me, the only thing that spoke to me truly was the sea. And the sea spoke to me no matter where I went. In Italy, then we left in 1947, we came out of Fiume and we went to Liguria and Camogli, Ruta Camogli. There we stayed for 5 years. And those, I must say, were the most joyful years of my life. And I mean joyful in every sense of the word. Yet, and by the way, within 6 months, I spoke perfect Ligurian. I spoke like one of them. Yet, 3 months after arriving in the United States, I couldn't say one word in that language, in that dialect, okay? Forgot everything. As a matter of fact, I can't remember the name or the face of any of my classmates or any of my professors except one, the math teacher, Torchia. And he was awful. If I had never became an engineer, it's because of him. He scared me. The kind of professors that I hope no longer exist, the kind that would take the chalk, toss it and show, the kind that would take, in those days we still had inkwells, he would take the inkwell and throw it at someone who displeased him, okay? It was awful, and I trembled, okay? That's the kind of, shall we say, teaching. I had a professor of classics, and I adored him, yet I can't remember his name. I adored him because he made the classics come alive. That's the kind of professor you need. But I don't remember anybody, nobody. For me, the sea and my bosco underneath our house were my two worlds. Yes?
So first of all, I would like to thank you very much, because I research in Italian-American gender violence literature. So what you said tonight, what you read, really resonates with what I do in my life. So thank you very much for this. My family too immigrated to America at the beginning of 1900. Also, thank you very much for the way you gave voice to women's experiences. They're not so far away in time. The situation is not really so much different. It didn't really improve that much. Well, may seem it did, but still a lot of that needs to be done.
I agree.
And then you reminded, it is a big compliment for me, so I hope you take it as a very big compliment, because I grew up with Antonio Gramsci stories rather than Cappuccetto Rosso when I was, my mom used to read Antonio Gramsci every night before sleeping. So Antonio Gramsci in the Prison Notebooks really spoke about the role of the intellectual as a person able to speak to people, uniting the imagination to speak about reality and to defend the role that we need to have in order to criticize what is wrong with reality. And your book really made me think. It really made me think.
Thank you
of
very
this.
much. Thank you very much. It reminds me of two things. One, many students of mine would come to me and tell me that so-and-so professor must have been very good, very top-notch. I said, why do you say that? Because when he speaks in class, I don't understand anything, so he must be very good. And I said, no. If he cannot make you understand, he is not good. He's talking to himself. He's not teaching. He's listening to his own voice. The other thing is that, talking about a lot of work still has to be done for women, by women and not. I remember one time I read a poem to a group of people, including women. And my poem was a rather long poem, the title of which was given to me by my wife. It was called Penelope. If anybody has my book for a handful of dirt or soil, look it up, Penelope. And I read that poem. I was speaking about women being abused by men. And this woman stood up afterwards. She said, "We don't need you. We women don't need you to speak up for us. We can do that ourselves." I said, "That's fine, do that. I don't think you should refuse
Exactly.
the support of women that understand what you're going through." That was the last time I spoke to that too. But thank you for what you've said. It's
Thank you very much.
it's very easy to criticize. It's very difficult to say something good.
To appreciate. I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? I'm willing to be on the cross. You can nail me there. Yes.
It would take a lot of courage for you to.
Could you speak up?
It would take a lot of courage for you to.
Would you like the microphone?
I'll try to speak louder.
Come a little closer. Unfortunately, I have hearing aid, but they're not working, obviously.
Did it take a lot of courage for you to write your first book and publish it? Would you?
Did it take a lot of courage?
Yeah.
It's a strange question, yes. No courage. The courage came from my wife. If it hadn't been for my wife, I probably wouldn't have published anything. I will tell you a story, a secret. But it's not a secret anymore. People that have heard me, they know about it. I was going every morning to university, and my wife, who had sacrificed her career here at UBC to be with me, would stay at home. She would have been a far better professor than I would ever dream of being. And that I say with total honesty and sincerity. But every time I left in the morning, I would leave her a few scribbled notes. A man would probably take that and throw it in the garbage. And I didn't know, but she kept every single one of them. And at a certain point, after about a year, she said, "Diego, do you realize that you're writing poetry?" I mean, the last poem I wrote was when I was probably 16 years old. Those are the kind of poems that you write in those days when you're falling in love maybe with someone. And I said, "Oh, come on, no, you're writing poetry. Keep at it." So she kept collecting them. At a certain point, she said, "I think you should publish it. That's in answer to your question, okay?" And I said, "Come on, no, it is poetry." And she put them all together, And I got in touch with a publisher, and he said, oh, yes. So he published it. And then another book came. The more she came, the more she encouraged me, the more I kept writing. And the poems got to be longer and longer, and eventually there was a second book. And after that, after it was just like, what do you call it, aquilone? How do you say aquilone? Kite. It was like a kite. She ran until I was flying. And after that, not that I didn't need her anymore, but I was flying. I was flying on my own, and it was beautiful. And so I wrote the third book. And that I did in both languages. And then after that, I kept going. But it was always my wife, Josie, who was my first reader and my first and only critic. And if I read a poem to her that wasn't good, she would tell me, throw it. It's not good. That's not a poem. And I did. And I mean, having been a literary critic herself, she knew when something was no good. And I knew that she was right. When I showed it to her, I knew that it wasn't exactly the best. So she said, no good, throw it. I threw it. And so I kept going. So she is the best that could have happened in my life. And she's telling me to cut it. Yes.
Do you still write your notes every day?
I tell her, I look at her, and she understands everything. You come to a certain age of so many years together, and you don't need to say things much anymore, but one look and one touch is enough to convey everything that you feel. And when you feel, it's not what you feel at that moment, but that feeling is compacted together with the feeling that went back to 40 years. So it's very, very powerful. I don't know if I made sense.
Yes.
Okay, it's not just that one single feeling. But thank you for asking me, because usually I would end up talking about myself in this way. Gotcha. So, anything else, and feel free.
Thank you.
I have nothing to hide, let's say. No? Okay, then.
Thank you.
Thank you.